All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the New Mexico Water Advocates third Thursday speaker series. We're so glad that you took the time to join us tonight. We have a very exciting and scary presentation for the evening. As we all know, this weather is lovely but terrifying, and kind of goes along with the theme of the evening's presentations. Just a few introductory comments from the Water Advocates, and then we'll jump right into our presentations for the evening. The Water Advocates' mission is to advocate for a balanced, equitable, and resilient water future for all New Mexico through public education, engagement, and civic participation, with urgent insistence on initiating and accelerating the transformative change necessary for New Mexico's successful adaptation to increasing water scarcity. The Water Advocates' main activism areas are located on the traditional homelands of the Southern Tiwa, pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache. Since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. All right, I am going to turn it over to Norm. And, oh, yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Norm Gom, President of the New Mexico Water Advocates. We are in the driest spring on record. Snowpack on the Rio Grande has never held less water on this date since measurements began, not once in the entire history of measurements. The Middle Rio Grande water supply will set new record lows this year. The stress on our water supplies has never been greater. This is not a future threat. It is happening now. This is not a drought. Droughts end. We are living through aridification caused by climate heating. We appear to be asleep at the wheel. For years, Middle Rio Grande water users have annually diverted water that the Rio Grande Compact allocates to users below Elephant Butte Dam. Total depletions are uncontrolled, illegal, and unsustainable. Without strong state intervention, cumulative shortfalls in delivering the lower Rio Grande share will trigger a Rio Grande Compact violation within 2 or 3 years, with serious legal and economic consequences for the Middle Rio Grande and for all of New Mexico. Only the New Mexico State Engineer has the authority to require compact compliance, and she is obligated by law to do so. Doing so is the state's part. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have 2 top state water officials presenting. Nat Chakeres, General Counsel to the State Engineer, and Hannah Riseley-White, Director of the Interstate Stream Commission, are the experienced professionals who lead this work. They are here to tell us what the state is doing and what comes next. Many of you may remember Nat's excellent presentation on this problem last May. He laid out clearly what needed to be done. Tonight I am hoping and expecting to hear firm announcements about the actions now underway. One last point. Only the state has the legal authority to act, but we all hold responsibility to understand what is at stake, to demand effective action, and to hold ourselves, our elected leaders, and our institutions accountable. Nat and Hannah, thank you for your leadership and your hard work. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Norm, and thank you to the Water Advocates. Let me get our slides up here. There we go. Perfect. Do you see our slides? Great.
We actually can see the presenter notes view. Can you switch the display?
Hold on one second.
It worked 3 minutes ago.
I know.
That's how it always goes, right?
How's this?
It's that's much better. Perfect.
Okay, fabulous. All right, good evening, everyone. My name, as Norm just said, is Hannah Riseley-White. I'm the director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, and I'm really pleased to be here this evening with Nat Chakeres. I want to start just by thanking you all, the advocates, for convening this conversation, and I want to thank everyone who's joined this evening. Of course, we who work in water know that water touches everything that we do in New Mexico, our most precious resource that needs to be actively and thoughtfully and strategically managed. And so really appreciate seeing folks on this evening who have been working on water issues for decades in New Mexico. And for those of you who are new to the conversation, welcome. We need you and we appreciate your participation. Also, it's exciting to see on tonight folks from throughout the Rio Grande Basin. This is an interconnected system and we all are going to need to work together. It's also nice to see legislators and our press attending, academic institutions, individuals working on climate. The problems that we face with water are problems that we cannot confront successfully without working together. And so we're very pleased to participate in the conversation this evening. Also, I'll give a brief disclaimer in that Nat and I both were in Truth or Consequences until 8 p.m. last night at an open house event there to meet with local residents related to lake levels at Elephant Butte. It was a very successful event for anyone here who might have joined. Thank you for joining us. We are looking to have more of those in-person conversations throughout the basin. We think it's really important for us to get out into communities, meet people, hear stories, and share information about the work that we're conducting. And so stay tuned for those opportunities coming your way. Before I jump into our presentation, I just want to see if Nat has any opening comments that you want to share as well, Nat.
I don't. I just wanted to thank everyone. I am really struck just looking at the attendance of the broad array of water users and stakeholders who are here today. It's an important conversation. Norm laid out, he's always been very firm and clear in his view of things and what needs to be done. And I think it's you're going to hear our perspective on these very same issues. There are some things that we're going to engage on in terms of, is this the right approach? Is this the right approach? And I think that's the way it should be. We need to be having hard conversations and challenging each other right now.
Thanks, Nat. Agreed. All right, so we are here this evening to talk. Let's see, why is this not advancing? There we go. About the challenges that we're facing specifically in New Mexico in the Middle Rio Grande. There's a lot of significant work happening at the state level throughout the state, but we're here to discuss particularly Middle Rio Grande issues and challenges related to compact compliance. And to set the stage, and Norm already did this for us somewhat in his opening comments, I think it is super critical that we start with the hydrology. What we're seeing this year is indicative of what's to come. And as many of you followed, the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources convened a panel of scientists back in 2022 to put forward a compilation of all of the current research related to climate change impacts to water resources in New Mexico. And the big takeaway for us is that we need to prepare for 25% or greater less water by 2070. And that includes less water flowing in our rivers and also less water recharging our aquifers. Last month, you heard from folks at EDF about groundwater management. That effort is going to be increasingly critical as communities rely more and more on groundwater as surface waters diminish. So what are we expecting? Lower snowpack, higher temperatures, increasing aridification, more variable rain and monsoon storm events, lower stream flows, and lower reservoir levels. When this report came out in 2022, many people said, oh, 2070, that's a long way off. We have time to work towards that and prepare. However, we are already seeing these impacts today, and we've seen them over the last several years. Norm mentioned we have unprecedented snowpack levels this year. This chart indicates exactly that. So this is most recent snow water equivalent information from the upper Rio Grande Basin. And what you'll notice in this slide is that the max in the record is the blue line, the min is the red line, the median is the gray line, and the black line is this year, 2026. And what's very remarkable to us who work in water about this figure is how much earlier the peak in snowpack occurred. So many weeks earlier than the previous record in terms of our peak snowpack. And then, of course, looking at this, you see that black line has crossed the red line, meaning that we now are in unprecedented territory in terms of the lowest snowpack on record for this time of year. This comes on the heels of last year, 2025, which had incredibly low stream flow across the state. You'll notice in this figure that in 2025, the Rio Grande Basin experienced 43% of the historical median flow. The San Juan Basin also experienced 50%. So when we're talking about expecting 25 to 30% less water by 2070, I can't emphasize enough that we're already seeing these impacts right now. We're heading into this year with that record-breaking low snowpack on the heels of a very dry year with very dry conditions throughout the basin. And we see temperatures increasing and continuing to increase. The top 5 warmest summers on record have occurred in the last 8 years, and that's since 1895. And this trend of temperature increases, as you all know, has significant consequences for water in that as we see increasing temperatures, we have increasing evapotranspiration from our landscape and also increasing demand from agriculture and crops. So even though we may have some variability in precipitation, and I know many of us are watching very closely the potential for a switch to El Nino conditions later this year and keeping our fingers crossed, increasing temperatures means even with variable precipitation, we just will have less water. So where do our reservoirs stand given that we have such dry conditions across the state, such minimal snowpack? We're also looking at heading into the season with not much water in storage. So Heron Reservoir currently is at 7% of capacity. That is a reservoir that holds San Juan Trauma Project water only. It has no authorization for native Rio Grande water. El Vado is at 11% of capacity, and I think you all may know that reservoir is currently under construction, so there's limitations as to how much water it can hold anyway. We're also under compact restrictions based on our compact status that limit how much water we can store in upstream reservoirs given our compact status. But El Vado is at 11% capacity, with 30% of that as prior and paramount water, 70% is San Juan Trauma water. Abiquiu is at 60% of capacity with mostly San Juan Trauma Project water. And Elephant Butte Reservoir is at 12% of capacity. Elephant Butte Irrigation District just allotted a 4-inch allotment to their members for the year, which is like 10% of a normal allotment. And here's the climate projections looking into the next 3 months. You'll see in the figure on the left, predictions for significantly above normal temperatures. And in the figure on the right, prediction for below average precipitation. So I think in talking to Norm, as we were waiting for folks to log on, the word that we were using was dire. The conditions looking into this season are dire. the state is working very hard to help prepare to inform communities about what's coming and support them in responding to those challenges throughout the Rio Grande Basin and the state. However, some bright news from our perspective is I think that we're positioned really well to begin to confront these challenges in a really aggressive way, given the work that's occurred over the last 4 or 5 years. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation the work that was convened by the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources. That report is on the left here, so that came out in 2022 and really emphasized the need for us to plan and prepare for diminishing water supplies and the impacts to our landscape of aridification, including sediment management and other themes that you'll hear more about later today. If you haven't seen that report, I highly recommend that you check that out. And it's been a very important driver for actions at the state level to address the situation that we're facing. You will also may be familiar with the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force that was convened with support of the governor by former state engineer Mike Hammond in 2022. That group of 20 citizen representatives and 9 agency representatives, as well as 9 legislative advisors, worked incredibly diligently over a short time period to come up with a slate of recommendations to chart the future of water management in New Mexico. That report also, many of the recommendations from it have already been implemented, and I'll speak to that more later, but a number of the recommendations in that report still need to be advanced. And then in January of 2024, the governor released her 50-year water action plan, which was informed, and she was very committed to that being based in science and informed by the best available science, which is why we started with Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources in 2022 with that climate change report. And it lays forward three categories of recommendations related to water conservation, developing new supplies, and protecting water resources. And that has been a very important driver for action at the state level as well. And I recommend you check that out too. So I think we have a significant consensus from the water management community and experts about what's needed, significant progress in implementing a number of the recommendations in these documents, and work ahead of us to continue to further that effort. And with this, and Nat and I are going to go back and forth a little bit in this presentation. We're also very much looking forward to your questions. With this, I'll hand it off to Nat to cover the next few slides.
Thank you, Hannah. We're going to have a little bit more direness than, before we get to what we're doing about it. Many of you are very familiar with the Rio Grande Compact. I'm going to just go over so that everybody's on the same page what it is we're talking about. So the Rio Grande Compact is between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. It was signed in 1938. And the reason why it's really the thing that's driving action on water management is because all water use within the state pursuant to state law is subordinate to our compact obligations. You can have a senior right in New Mexico, but if New Mexico itself does not have the water through the compact or an interstate apportionment, you cannot use it. That's a case that was established. That principle was the same year that we had the Rio Grande Compact signed. And the particulars of the Rio Grande Compact are really important to understand in order to look at the effects for New Mexico users. Hannah talked about our future hydrology in the state. We're going to have variability in precipitation that exceeds the variability that we've seen historically. And we already have had an extremely variable precipitation history in New Mexico over the past 100 years. Storage of water helps smooth that out considerably. It provides a much more stable and reliable supply for water users if they can store when we get a lot of precipitation, and then we can use it as we need it. It's not going to fix all of our problems, and if there's no precipitation, as we haven't had this year, you could see all our storage is dry. But we want the ability to store water in order to smooth out those peaks and valleys in our water supply future. And the compact foresaw that New Mexico is going to want to store water, and it incentivized us to comply with the compact and get really into a credit status in the compact by effectively restricting the amount of water of native Rio Grande water we're allowed to store in upstream reservoirs, depending on our compact status. There's several ways that works. It gets a little fiddly, but the bottom line is our storage abilities and flexibility increase considerably when we are not in a compact debit status. And we can advance the slide. So what are our rights and obligations under the compact? So the compact has specific provisions with respect to what Colorado is supposed to do, and then it's got stuff with respect to New Mexico, both in the Middle Rio Grande and in the Lower Rio Grande. And we just settled Texas v. New Mexico, which is a fight over what happened in the Lower Rio Grande. I want to emphasize that case does not change at all and never was going to change at all what New Mexico's obligations are in the Middle Rio Grande. That was not about the Middle Rio Grande obligations. Those are spelled out pretty precisely in the compact already. And so when there's folks out there talking, oh, New Mexico has this new settlement with Texas and they're going to have to deliver all this water to Texas now, that has to do with how water is divided below Elephant Butte. Everything we're going to talk about tonight is about how to get supply into Elephant Butte, and that's our compact obligation here. We believe that the way the settlement was written, it actually aligns New Mexico's incentives, so we're not sort of pitting one region of New Mexico against the other, as had been framed in past years. We all benefit as water users if we can effectively get water from the Middle Rio Grande into Elephant Butte. And that's really all I'm going to say about Texas v. New Mexico. But this graph, it's really a graphical depiction of New Mexico's index obligation. So on the y-axis, we have the compact allocation between New Mexico and Elephant Butte deliveries. So between the Middle Rio Grande and what needs to go into Elephant Butte as a function of the x-axis, which is the annual Rio Grande inflows at the Otoe gauge. As again, many of you know, Otoe gauge, it's right under the bridge, or it's right near the bridge as you take the road from Jacona or Pojoaque up to Los Alamos. So it's near Pojoaque, New Mexico, and it represents sort of the dividing part in New Mexico between what we call the Upper Rio Grande and the Lower Rio Grande. This graph shows that as those inflows increase, and it goes up to 1.5 million acre feet, the actual index goes up for an infinite distance. At the beginning, when we have really low flows, New Mexico gets to use somewhere roughly around half of the water in the Middle Rio Grande, and New Mexico must deliver the remainder to Elephant Butte. But as those flows increase, as they push out close to 1 million acre feet and farther, the amount that we can deplete in the Middle Rio Grande really starts to flatten out. The asymptotic limit is 405,000 acre feet. I don't think this graph actually goes out far enough to get us quite to that point, but that is the maximum amount of water that's allowed to be depleted from those flows. I also want to emphasize all of the water that arises in the Jemez Mountains that flows down into the Rio Grande, that all can be used, but in deliveries of that water can count towards our delivery obligations. So we can use Jemez River water as well. It's not separately accounted for. We just need to make sure that we deliver to Elephant Butte the amount of water that's captured in sort of the orange part of the graph. This 405,000 acre foot cap and really all the area under the blue curve includes riparian depletions. This is not depletions that are resulting from diversions or from what was used, the phrase used at the time of the compacts, man's activities. This is all depletions. There's just a gauge at Otoe and there's measurement at Elephant Butte. And it doesn't matter to the compact if the use of water was because we've got a bunch of salt cedar, or because we're diverting the water and using it in some facility, or because we're farming with it. What matters is the net amount of depletions. And that's our budget. That blue area is the amount of water we can use as a function of inflows. You can advance. This is our historic cumulative index performance. Now, our deliveries, the people who drafted the compact recognize there's a lot of variability in precipitation and inflows. And so they gave us fairly wide bounds in which New Mexico could underdeliver, overdeliver, and there would just be a cumulative departure that we'd keep track of. And the compact says it's not a violation of the compact until we fall below a 200,000 acre foot debit. Well, we did that in the 1950s. You'll see pretty early on, after the compact was signed, New Mexico plunged deeply into compact violation territory. What happened at that time? A number of things. Texas sued. That lawsuit didn't go anywhere because there were disputes about sovereign immunity. I'm not so sure that those issues would block a lawsuit now if Texas sued again. But luckily, we didn't have the lawsuit part of it. And then New Mexico and the federal government did a lot of things to try to climb out of that hole. We did extensive engineering all along the channel. So we built what's now called the low flow conveyance channel. It's a channel below the Santa Casia, well, it's below Albuquerque, I'll say, for a certain stretch of the river, designed to more effectively convey water from the drains from New Mexico's water users in the Middle Rio Grande in order to get it to Elephant Butte. Because historically, we saw that there's an enormous amount of riparian riparian water use and evaporation in that stretch below Santa Casia, so below Socorro. A huge amount of water is lost. And so we built a low flow conveyance channel to try to get the water through there more effectively. We did other channel work all along the Rio Grande up along the Chama River as well. And then we started administering and limiting groundwater depletions. So in 1956, New Mexico said, if anybody wants to drill a new well, say municipal wells for Albuquerque, you're going to have to find surface water offsets to offset the effects on this graph effectively on New Mexico flows that get to Elephant Butte. And so we've kept our groundwater use more or less in check compared to what's happened in other parts of the West, which helped get us out of this hole. Another thing and so by the early 1970s, New Mexico got out of the hole. We were then helped immensely by several things. One of the biggest ones was the San Juan Chama project coming online in the early 1970s. That's a project to divert, depends yearly what the supply is, but the maximum now we have is about 96,500 acre feet of water. Divert those from the headwaters of the Colorado into Heron Reservoir, which Hannah mentioned before. That's new water coming into the system. We haven't had full delivery of that for a number of years, and given the hydrology, we probably won't, but it's still tens of thousands of extra acre feet of water that New Mexico can use and helps us get off of the use of Rio Grande water. And that helped get us into significant credit situations. Now you'll see here that we have, we got up in credit status and then we dropped back down in the early 1980s, but we got back out again. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, we were in pretty good status. You see a few major drops heading up to 2010. Those weren't actual hydrologic underdeliveries. Like you see this massive drop in 2003. What those actually were was New Mexico traded in credit. We had so much credit, we were trading it with Texas for permission to store water later on. And we're glad we did, because now we were able to use those to store water when we need it now. But those drops ate away at our credit. And then we were sort of dancing around the zero line for a number in the 20 teens. Since about 2018-19, we've had a significant drop. And that's pretty concerning. That's what Norm was talking about. If you look historically, you can have drops hydrologically of, 25, 50,000 acre feet in a year. That's enough, if we just have a couple of those in a row, to take us over that red line. And again, the red line means we could be subject to sort of federal judicial control over our water resources if we can't manage it ourselves. We've been trying for the past couple of years to turn the ship. I'm glad that the rate of decline is dropping. This doesn't show our 2025 departures because those have not been finally ratified and accepted by the Rio Grande Compact Commission. Their engineer advisors are meeting right now this week to work out the accounting. I don't think there's going to be any major, changes from what we're seeing on the slide. That we did go down a bit more, but it was by 8,000 acre feet. Again, we still got to get change the direction of the trend, but a drop of 8,000 feet is better than a drop of 15, 20,000 acre feet. So we are, seeing some things that are helping us move that trend, but we have a lot more work to do. You'll see also in 2023, there was a slight upward tick. That was actually an accounting adjustment, kind of like those big drops you saw in the early 2000s. We had an accounting fix with Texas that gave us some credit there, which was really nice to get, but it wasn't because we did anything special hydrologically in that year. We can advance now. Now, this is a slightly different graph showing some similar information. This is not cumulative. This is just year on year, our compact deliveries, 1940 through 2025. Those accounting adjustments I just talked about are not on here. So you'll see that dating back to really 2018 or so, we've only had 1 year where we had a net positive delivery. Another thing that you'll see here that's interesting, 2018, 2019, those were not bad supply years hydrologically. A lot of times, because of the way that curve sort of showed that New Mexico's depletions have to level off if we get really big inflows. A lot of times our worst years in terms of deliveries are good supply years. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more about why, how we're approaching our strategies. But we can advance the slide.
I think I'll take this slide and then hand back to Nat in a moment here. So I think we said we had something dire and then something more dire to talk about. And now is the part of this presentation in which we rally everyone to take action and to understand the significant work underway at the state. And so I want to just start by emphasizing again, because we often get questions about, who cares about the compact? Why is this so important? First of all, we rely on Colorado complying with the compact to deliver us water into New Mexico, so very important. And then as Nat started in his portion of the conversation here a few minutes ago, state water law is subordinate to the compact. And so with the exception of tribal water rights, even the most senior water rights in New Mexico will be implicated if New Mexico violates the compact. And so one of the things that I feel is really important for us to message is it is certainly and absolutely the state's job to lead the effort to comply with the compact. And it is very much in all of the water users' interests to support that because of the potential implications to all of you of what a compact violation would look like. The way that we come at how to fix this problem necessarily involves holistic management of the entire basin. Water crosses all kinds of divisions, and also necessarily requires an all hands on deck approach in terms of state agencies working with federal agencies, working with water user groups, working with stakeholders. Every level of water use needs to be engaged, and this is why we're so excited that so many of you are here tonight. And the way that I look at how do we fix this problem really falls into two sort of categories. One is increasing efficiencies, and that means river channel efficiencies, but it also means efficiencies in all of our systems. Irrigation distribution systems, municipal systems. To the extent that we have inefficiencies, we need to work on addressing those and rapidly. And we should expect that even with all of that work, it will likely not be enough. We will have to find ways to reduce overall depletions. So when you think about 25% less water by 2070, all of us should be thinking in our lives and in our businesses, how would we go about that with 25 to 30% less water, and work to implement that now. The state's efforts are really focused on concerted work around water rights administration, which is part of what we're here to talk about today, and Nat will talk about that. And then on the ground projects that include improving efficiency and reducing depletions. We're also really excited and feel like there's an incredible group of partners across state, federal, and stakeholder groups right now to look at how do we build in innovation and flexibilities to how we operate our systems. What are the opportunities that we might find where we can find mutual benefit and increase efficiency and reduce depletions? And so really exciting time to be doing this work, even though this situation seems so dire. I'm very inspired by the community of leadership across state, federal, and stakeholder groups in place right now. And I think we have a real opportunity to develop operational flexibilities and sort of innovate. And then I think regional water planning, as many of you know, we have a new regional water planning statute. I'll talk about that more later. I think it will be a critical component of solving the problem in the Middle Valley, and looking forward to convening that effort. And then there's a significant role for the state to educate and engage stakeholders and water users on water management in general, on the hydrologic reality that we're all confronting, and on the importance of meeting our compact obligations. And that's another thing that we're working on actively, including, I mentioned earlier, being in Truth or Consequences last night. I think it's just going to be really critical. We create more and more opportunities to access information online, but also to in person meet water leaders from across the state and learn how to engage. So we're going to now turn from the dire to all the exciting work that we're doing at the state to solve this problem. And with that, I'll hand it back to Nat to talk about water rights administration before I talk about those other pieces.
Thanks. And I'm talking about administration first. I want to just say that we have, like, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about investments in projects and channel work. And to my mind, administration this year is a rough year in terms of supply. There's only so much water to squeeze out of the system. But what we want to make sure of is any savings we get, any depletion reductions we are able to work out of the system, they actually get to Elephant Butte. And so the efficiencies part of it is absolutely critical. We've got to comply with our environmental obligations. We've got to do this in an environmentally responsible way. But it doesn't do us any good to be administering and cracking down on people if it's not going to result in more water getting to Elephant Butte. So that part up front, we also need to have the tools in place and be doing what we can do to reduce water use when necessary. We're not eager to reduce water use, through coercive means. As my last bullet here, state-led priority administration results in uncompensated losses for water users. Unsurprisingly, that triggers litigation, and it's resource intensive for everybody. We'd prefer not to do it. I talked last year in the carrots and sticks presentation about more mechanics about how that works. I'm not going to go through all those details. We would really prefer, and what we said there is work on a carrot level with water users. I do think that's bearing results, and we'll talk a little bit, maybe not in the level of detail Norm wants, but a little bit of where we're going in that direction. But administration can mean making people use less water. We want people to figure out ways to use less water or to make the water they're using go farther so that we get more water to Elephant Butte. Our administrative guidelines, as I mentioned before, were based on, they've been updated since then, but they're based on a principle that we first established in 1956, that groundwater use beyond that date cannot influence the river. That's helped us. But if we get to points where we have to be cutting surface water users, we also need to be cutting groundwater users as well. Their priority dates would not be senior, certainly, to a number of the surface water users who may not be getting supply. What we are going to be doing, and I'm jumping around on the slides here just because I thematically things are running the way I'm stating them. But the what we're doing is we're laying the groundwork for being able to administer and limit groundwater withdrawals. The first step is creating a water master district with a metering order. That's coming this year. We're pretty advanced in the way of doing that. All that requires folks to do is if they're not already permitted with a metering requirement, they're going to have to get a meter installed in a certain amount of time. And we're doing a fair amount of work to make sure that we identify all the wells that would be subject to this requirement. So that itself doesn't require anybody to reduce use, but it does immediately put them on notice that we're watching their water use and that we're ready to take administrative action if necessary. Now, Norm thinks that, leadership has been asleep at the wheel. I like to think we're not asleep, but I think that the fact that we're getting a metering order out now, I am happy to state that I think the state could have done that earlier. That is something that's a pretty important step if we need to administer and cut back on groundwater use. We're also doing enforcement and compliance. We've had a number of water users point out, hey, I think that these other folks are using too much, or I don't think that that particular water user has their permitting in order. And we're following up on that stuff. We have litigation actively. Actually, some water users initiated litigation about what they identified as illegal water diversions by the Bureau of Reclamation. We are following up on that, and we're committed to making sure that the Bureau of Reclamation offsets any excess depletions that it incurs based on its activities. It's the keeping within your water rights is something that all levels of government need to comply with. Federal government, we have to make sure our state facilities also comply, as well as private water users. The next thing I wanted to say on administration is curtailment is already effectively happening for a lot of farmers in the Middle Rio Grande. We have a number of farmers who I recognize on this. We probably have some I don't recognize. They know they didn't get full deliveries last year, and they're being told they're not going to get full deliveries this year. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District has some water in storage from the San Juan Chama project, but not enough to meet all of its needs throughout the summer if we don't get a lot of rain. So farmers are already suffering, and that's something that's a reality that we want to, not make sure that we're unnecessarily exacerbating. We've got a lot of reduction in use just by reason of the fact that oftentimes we don't have enough water to deliver to those water users. One of the things we want to do is get our storage back up to where we can store that water if we're in compact credit status, so that we can get those farmers more water during years where we don't get a lot of precipitation. But we're not there this year. And again, we have to be the bad guy when we have to be to get us into compact compliance. But ultimately, what we want to see is New Mexico effectively use the water we're legally allowed to use it in whatever way that our water users want to use it. The last thing I'll just say on this slide, I'd mentioned when I jumped to the carrots and sticks part, is state law encourages that we have water users agree to alternative administration arrangements. State law requires that a junior user gets cut off 100% before senior users have to lose a drop. And that's a pretty harsh arrangement. It's not an arrangement that works very well for municipalities. It's hard for a city the size of Albuquerque or Rio Rancho to not deliver any water if it were out of priority. So state law recognizes we can make arrangements that if we get an equivalent amount of water out of some alternative arrangement than a priority call, that's okay, and we can administer that way. And we can advance the slides. There, by the way, there's a lot of questions coming up, a lot of interesting questions. We're going to field as many of them as we can later on, and some of them we might just be able to follow up with folks offline. So this is just a summary of the ways that I think New Mexico law gives us flexibility. The one thing I hadn't already talked about is Our strategic water reserve allows the state to purchase water rights for compact compliance purposes or for environmental purposes or for other sort of uh, aquifer management purposes in the area of streams. We're not looking to buy our way completely out of this crisis. There may be some purchases of water rights that the state does, and we're going to do a fair amount of purchasing of water rights in the Lower Rio Grande. But this isn't a problem that I think money is just going to solve, where we're going to buy a bunch of water rights. But under the appropriate circumstances, the Strategic Water Reserve does help us meet some compact goals and other goals, including environmental compliance. And we can move on to the next slide.
Great. I think this comes back to me now. First, I really want to commend the Office of the State Engineer for tackling some difficult things in the Middle Valley, including what Nat just outlined. The metering order is overdue, and it's exciting to see that coming. This slide is really emphasizing some of the major investments that the state has made through our state legislature in the last several years that support this effort. However, I realized that we didn't include this on a slide, but I should start by saying that we're very appreciative of what came out of this legislative session, not only in terms of the non-recurring funding, which I'll talk about in a moment here, but because of the increase in recurring funding to Office of the State Engineer that will provide for additional staffing for both Indian water rights settlements implementation and additional staff for administration and management in the Middle Valley. Much of the staff working on Indian water rights settlements will also be supporting efforts in the Rio Grande, and having that additional staff capacity is critical for us to actually do the work that's necessary to carry out the metering order and all of the pieces that I'm going to talk about now. So first, a big thank you to the legislature for that investment in the agency in terms of recurring funding for staffing. It's very hard for us to do this work without the people. And then also maybe just to recognize passage of House Bill 111, which provided additional enforcement capability for Office of the State Engineer against water theft. It was the first statutory update to OSE's enforcement capability with regards to the fines for water theft since 1907. And so all of the pieces that Nat just mentioned have a little bit more teeth if they have the ability to enforce those larger fines. And thank you to those of you who help get that bill across the finish line. So exciting news from this session. We also got significant additional funding this year to support efforts that Interstate Stream Commission is leading, related particularly to active channel management for multiple purposes. And so over the last several legislative sessions in total, we've received $55 million in non-recurring funding. That includes both special appropriation funding and capital outlay to support this effort throughout the basin. And again, we're trying to look at the system very holistically in terms of what's needed and then who are the partners. And I'll say more on that in a minute. We think we need to absolutely invest in improved river conveyance and particularly sediment management as we have less water in our streams. New Mexico already has heavily sediment-laden stream systems. With less water, that becomes an increasing problem. As we see aridification of our landscapes, we see increasing potential for big slugs of sediment to come into our river systems. And we also need to invest in bosque and habitat management. It will be increasingly important for those of you who care about our ecosystems to pay attention and invest in those as we see our supplies diminishing. I should say that I'm pleased the Interstate Stream Commission executed our first strategic water reserve purchase in the Middle Valley. We've been leasing water under the reserve for a decade or more now to support particularly projects involving habitat and species protection. But we have for the first time now executed an actual water rights purchase, which is very exciting. As Nat said, I don't see us buying our way out of this compact issue. It's going to take all of the other pieces. But the strategic water reserve, as we face increasing aridification, is going to be increasingly important, particularly for habitat and species purposes. This legislative session, Interstate Stream Commission received $9 million to work in conjunction with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District on bosque management projects. Again, we've seen over the last several years increasing threats of fire in the bosque, and the real need to manage that actively. And we're very pleased to be partnering with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District on that. That funding will also be available to support river channel projects throughout the basin, particularly enabling us to respond to sediment inflow to our systems. And then also the funding we received in the last several years supported low flow conveyance channel maintenance. So as Nat said, that channel serves as a drain from Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. The drain isn't functioning very well. We don't have very efficient delivery of water back to the river. And so we've invested together with Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District in upgrades and improvement to that infrastructure. All of this work absolutely has to be conducted together with critical partnerships with our federal agencies. We're working very closely with Reclamation and Army Corps of Engineers on a number of things, and I'll say more about that later. And then also we're really looking to partner with the experts on the ground. We have Interstate Stream Commission entered into a cooperative agreement with Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District in order to have a little bit more agility in implementing projects between the state and the district to complement those efforts that are moving at the federal level. And we're excited about that partnership. We also have a cooperative agreement in place with Elephant Butte Irrigation District, through which we're moving a lot of efforts down there that will support implementation of the settlement that Nat mentioned, namely stormwater management projects in the lower Rio Grande. This work is occurring and we're thinking about it all across the basin. I think many of you know in 2024, after a major storm event, a huge sediment plug came into the Rio Chama. It reduced flow through the river to 10% of what the channel should have been moving. It also flooded a number of properties. We were able to move quickly with partners, particularly from San Juan Chama project, to get out in the river to clear that plug. We're continuing to monitor that situation very closely. We're also working with our federal partners up there. Interstate Stream Commission has been working with Army Corps of Engineers on a planning assistance to the state's grant to look at where on the landscape there's potential for additional large inflows of sediment and identify opportunities to contain that sediment before it gets in the river in the first place. And then I should acknowledge a working group that was initiated by Representative Susan Herrera, who just announced her retirement. We're sad to see her go and really grateful for a number of amazing things that she did in her tenure, including last year convening a state, federal, local water user work group to identify and implement solutions. A number of us, state and the Rio Chama Seiki Association, had secured funding to address various components of the problem on the Rio Chama, but those efforts weren't very well informed across each other or coordinated. And so that group is now meeting regularly to coordinate those efforts, and we're actively engaging in that and identifying additional opportunities to support that work. And then I wanted to dig in on a little bit more of specific projects that we're looking to move in the Middle Rio Grande over the next year plus. And emphasizing again here, part of what I'm very excited about is the team that we're partnering with. Again, we can't do this on our own. It's something that needs to be all hands on deck. And we're very pleased with the coordination, not only through the cooperative agreement with Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District that I mentioned, but also with Reclamation, who has significant funding available to them to advance projects. And so what we're really convening is all of those folks coming together to look at how do we take all of the resources that we each collectively have, funding, staff, equipment, expertise, and bring it to bear in a very well coordinated way in the Middle Valley. And that effort seems critical to me. So a number of things to highlight. We're working on realigning the Delta channel. So that's as the river flows into Elephant Butte Reservoir, sediment drops out That creates a delta. That sediment ultimately becomes an obstruction to the river flows reaching the reservoir. Like Nat was saying earlier, we can do a lot of conservation efforts in the Middle Valley, but if that water can't make it into the reservoir, it doesn't help us. We just completed initial phase of a NEPA process for a realignment of the channel through the delta. So about 10 miles of delta channel to be replaced so that water can efficiently make it into the reservoir. We're also a partner on Reclamation's Lower Santa Casia Reach Improvement Project. The federal government has dedicated over $140 million to a channel realignment project south of Santa Casia that has the potential to make a huge difference if done right. And again, there's also habitat considerations that need to be balanced in that. We've been engaging very actively with Reclamation on how to best put that money on the ground, including also engaging with the irrigation districts who care very much about how this project plays out. So Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, as well as Elephant Butte Irrigation District, and really pleased with the dialogue across the state entities, Reclamation, and those user groups in identifying the best path forward for that project. Interstate Stream Commission is also working with Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, not with the federal government. I said earlier, it gives us a little bit more agility in the Isleta Reach to develop a comprehensive reach management plan to support water conservation, habitat, and improve conveyance. And then we're also working in the Albuquerque Reach to address sediment management and removal of islands and bars. That's actually an obligation under the biological opinion for the state. And also will support river channel conveyance efficiencies, and looking to begin construction on that this fall. So those are efforts that are really focused on the river channel and our management of the river channel. And not mentioned on the plot earlier of sort of our cumulative compact debit over time. Construction of the low flow conveyance channel is one of the things that helped us dig out of the hole in the 1950s. Another component of that was significant channel projects that occurred at that time through Bureau of Reclamation. And much more is needed, right? And that includes working particularly with the major water users in the basin on both short-term and long-term potential solutions. So we are engaged and having productive discussions with them about what may be possible. Both, again, what do we all need to do this year, but then also how do we put in place the things that could be effective long-term. And then I really want to take a moment to celebrate those partners in terms of much of the effort that they're already doing that is leading efforts across the West to conserve water, particularly Albuquerque and City of Santa Fe. In our conversations, say in the Colorado River Basin and looking at water conservation efforts from municipalities, New Mexico's municipalities are leading the charge in many ways in terms of water conservation efforts, and we're wanting to continue to celebrate and support those efforts. Also, Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District has implemented multiple dynamic fallowing projects, increased data collection, system efficiency. All of those things are going to be critical for the state and for all of us to support moving forward. And then investments are going to be needed in planning for improved water management, including better and more data, more easily available data, full implementation of the Water Data Act, building the modeling tools that we need to inform decision-making at the local and state level, and sharing those tools. So I think there's a major effort at Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission to really elevate technical tools, focus and invest in data collection and making data available. That's something that will be increasingly critical and will play a critical role as we start to convene that regional water planning effort that I'll talk more about in a minute. And then also, how are we participating in basin-wide planning for more flexible operations, including Reclamation's Rio Grande Basin Study. There are a number of opportunities for us at the state to engage in those planning efforts that then have the potential to bring resources to bear for the work that we're carrying forward. Okay, and then On Water Security Planning Act, some of you helped pass this statute. Some of you helped write it. It was a recommendation of the 2022 Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force. And the recommendation was to revisit the original regional water planning statute, which passed in 1987 and had largely been considered to have met its purpose, with something much more robust and with real potential to affect change on the ground. That statute was passed unanimously in the 2023 legislative session. Interstate Stream Commission saw this as an opportunity to completely rethink regional water planning. We did not want to do that in a vacuum, so we spent the time in 2024 and 2025 really engaging the public across the state through a whole series of open house events and online platforms to collect input. I'm very pleased to say, if you didn't hear, the commission promulgated and adopted a rule this year in 2026, and we're now working to finalize the guidelines that are also called for by the statute, so that we can then begin convening those councils later this year. Water Security Planning Act is intended to really bolster public involvement in planning and engagement in planning. It's also intended, and by statute, to be grounded in the best available data, science, and models to inform that planning process. And importantly, and this was very important to the legislature, really do a better job of tying planning to implementation through priorities for funding, state or federal funding. In our previous iterations of planning, many of the plans would end up with lists of hundreds or more of recommendations with no ranking, and it was hard to make sense of what the priorities were. So one of the things we'll be working with the regions on is how to prioritize those lists, which may be challenging, but will be very important. And I think everything that we're doing, including through this planning effort, is intended to really build local capacity. There is much that we can do and need to do at the state, but where the rubber hits the road really will be investing in capacity in our local communities to craft the solutions that have meaning and that will result in benefits, and then supporting them and implementing those. And that involves investing in capacity at the regional level and local level. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is so that's our regional water planning work. Our state water planning work, the state water plan requires the statute requires Interstate Stream Commission to revisit or update that statute every 5 years. We're really hoping to make it more of an ongoing process of focusing on what does the state need to be paying attention to. Regional water planning is going to be looking at how do regions craft and implement solutions. State water planning really needs to be focused on what is the state needing to work on to meet statewide objectives, which again have implications for everyone as well. One of the main statewide objectives that we have is compact compliance, for all the reasons we've talked about in this presentation. And so our current state water planning efforts are actually focused on building a compact Rio Grande Compact education tool that would help, and I mentioned earlier, real important need for us to educate and engage, help people understand why the compact is important and why contributing to New Mexico's compliance with the compact is important and has implications for you in your home or in your business. And so we're working on building a tool that will be a map-based Power BI interface that will provide data, but also information for a lay audience to really understand the compact and why it's important. This will be a tool that we can continue to build on as we then look to other basins and other compacts to build similar tools. And I'm sure there's things that we haven't mentioned that we'll later think, oh shucks, we should have said something about that. But there are tremendous efforts moving at the state level on all of the fronts that we just highlighted. And we're really pleased to have this conversation with you all tonight, and really very much looking forward to working together with you all and water users throughout the basin to implement the solutions that are needed to protect all of us, including from a compact standpoint. And with that, I'll see if Nat has any closing comments as well, and then we're excited to engage with you all on your questions.
Thanks, Hannah. I just want to emphasize, I think, from the comments, we'll get into it. Seems like there's a lot of a bit of desire for sort of reckoning for human water users. MRGCD is taking a terrible delivery year right now. We're not in the business of sort of retribution or trying to go after any water users who people think that should have been gone after before. We are trying to ensure that all New Mexicans benefit from the water that we legally have entitled to by getting the compact into compliance. If anyone's using water illegally or over diverting, we are, I think, significantly increasing our capability of addressing that. But we also need to make sure that if we're going to reduce illegal diversions, at the same time, we're not delaying enforcement, but we also want to make sure that if we have to do priority administration, or people come up with alternative administration, or we're cracking down on illegal diversions, all of which are things that we're actively preparing for, the water actually gets to Elephant Butte. None of that matters if it doesn't get down there. So yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about the infrastructure and the sediment work. The way I look at it is, this is a river that doesn't care if it, where the water goes. There's a lot of sand around it that gets in there and is going to alter its course or block its course. And that's just the reality of us living in an engineered water system. It's an engineered river from, really Abiquiu or, further up the Chama, El Vado, Heron, all the way down to its outlet at the Gulf of Mexico. So we're looking at, we gotta enforce the laws. We gotta make sure New Mexico water users do what they can to curtail. We've also got to make sure that water gets to where it's supposed to get to. Otherwise, all that enforcement didn't get us anywhere. So that's really why we're trying to emphasize both prongs of that. So thank you, and we're happy, to take some questions.
Fabulous. Yeah, we had a lot of good questions come in through the chat. Start out with a couple of easy ones. Who sits on the Rio Grande Compact Commission?
Hannah, you want to handle that one, or?
Sure. So the Rio Grande Compact Commission involves commissioners from each of the 3 states and then a federal chair. By statute, New Mexico's state engineer, so Elizabeth Anderson, is New Mexico's compact commissioner. The compact commissioner for Colorado is their state engineer, Jason Ullman. And the compact commissioner from Texas is Bobby Scove. And currently the federal chair is Hal Simpson.
Who's a former state engineer of Colorado, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Lots of very knowledgeable people. We had a question about if the 90,000 acre feet of relinquishment credits that New Mexico holds could be applied to the debt.
It's a great question. Hannah might have some things to add, and it's in the conversation. I think it's a pretty sort of unprecedented situation where we have that type of a credit. If we were to, be looking like we're facing a violation, there's ways to do it. Just give that back to Texas and move it on the spreadsheet. That's probably the cleanest. There's also informal ways of doing that, of effectively trying to use that to store water that then we'd usher in the wintertime to Elephant Butte, so that there'd be very few losses. And it's very much it's something that we're thinking about. It's a pretty unprecedented thing, but when last spring, I think it was, I was listening to a presentation from a special projects deputy area manager for the Bureau of Reclamation, Michelle Estrada Lopez, and she said, in these times, nothing should be off the table, and all the rules we thought were preventing us from doing things, we shouldn't feel afraid to revisit them. And that's the kind of thing that, yeah, we are looking at that as one of the places where we can work on our compact debt. We ultimately need to be in balance, right? We can't keep running debts. So it sort of wouldn't be a permanent thing, but that's certainly in the conversation.
And I would just add, I think, that relinquishment credit has been used to the benefit of users in New Mexico. And ideally, that's what we would continue to do. In an ideal world, we are keeping every drop of water for New Mexico in New Mexico for New Mexico users. That's our goal while meeting our compact obligations. However, it is valuable that we have that potential tool if needed. But I think it's one of we can't rely we need more than that tool. We can't just say, oh, we'll just fix that with that. We really just need to double down on developing system efficiencies and ability to reduce depletions depending on the hydrology, have resilience in our systems so that in an uncertain hydrologic condition, there's some certainty about what happens when there's more limited supplies. I think we're fortunate in New Mexico in that, unlike many other states, we have a really rich heritage of shortage sharing in our Acequia community, in our tribal community. That's something we can look to learn from about how do you adapt to different supplies. And so, yeah, I think ultimately, is that an option to use? Yes. And, to the extent we can preserve that for New Mexico users, that's what we'd like to do while we're working to build in sort of those knobs on our systems. How do we adjust to changing hydrology?
Thank you so much. Um, has the OSC considered how they're going to publicly notice the upcoming metering order? I know that there's been a lot of challenges with getting notice out in the Amit Basin specifically. Many people don't know that there's a metering order in place in that basin and haven't been metering when they should have. Is there a strategy that you all are considering to ensure that you get accurate data from people and actually get meters put in place?
Yes, thank you. We are very much thinking hard about that. I think in the Middle Rio Grande, we had a more successful rollout of our metering order there, and we're looking to apply and learn the lessons everywhere. I think we have a lot more opportunities now to reach people. We're not as good in sort of social media and other spaces as we should be, but we're improving, and we're planning robust outreach, a lot of notice. And another thing that I think helps is we're hoping we can look to the legislature for some funding to help people install meters and the appropriate folks. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's something that we're thinking hard about and,
Right?
and preparing for.
That's great. We had one participant who's pretty concerned about the intersection of the fallowing, the voluntary fallowing program, and how that impacts property tax and agricultural exemptions for properties. Is there any sort of conversations between counties and the ISC and MRGCD about how to kind of manage those together so that people aren't losing their agricultural exemptions when they're doing these voluntary fallowing programs?
Yeah, and I know you addressed it to ISC. I'll go ahead and tackle that one. Yes, this issue is very much on our radar screen. Former state engineer Mike Hammond has done a lot of advocacy on this issue, and we don't want to see agricultural producers be penalized for engaging in fallowing. We're not, normally tax policy isn't our lane, but we certainly want to make sure that people who want to keep farmland as farmland, even if they're engaging in a fallowing program, should not be disincentivized from engaging in the fallowing because they want to keep it in farmland. So there's been some legislative efforts. There's been some, back and forth with MRGCD and I think it's the Sandoval County tax assessor. And we're hoping that gets worked through because we very much want to see people be able to engage in fallowing farmland. We're going to need, if we're using 75 or so percent of our water right now in ag, and we're going to see 30% less water, we're going to have to reduce our water use in ag. And we'd rather that be coming first from folks who are voluntarily willing to do it.
Great, thank you so much. We had a question about our obligation to Mexico and how come nobody is ever talking about that, water deliveries to Mexico.
And I can just keep on talking,
Yeah,
but
that's
jump in. So
great. Go for it.
that's really part of the Lower Rio Grande obligations. It's not a separate Middle Rio Grande obligation. So if we were to be presenting on Texas v. New Mexico or the Lower Rio Grande, we'd certainly mention that. Just so, because the question was asked and people are aware, by treaty, the United States must deliver up to 60,000 acre-feet from the supply in Elephant Butte to Mexico each year. And that's delivered first before the water districts get their deliveries of water. And that's something that the United States takes very seriously, and I don't think we've ever breached that treaty obligation.
And that's also why, though, it's so important for us to get that water that we deliver to Elephant Butte is what then supports those deliveries to Mexico.
Thank you. What is the nuclear option as far as major water users are concerned? Would it be mandatory fallowing, priority calls? Do we have a last ditch plan?
Well, I would say the very worst case scenario that I can imagine would be that no surface diversions are allowed anywhere in the Middle Rio Grande except to serve prior and paramount tribal lands. The compact is pretty clear that we can't curtail those water rights to, for compact purposes. And that would leave the water users who have San Juan Chama water to have to entirely rely on San Juan Chama water. That's and with groundwater, which effectively sort of is kind of has a similar priority to the pre-1997 surface diverters also being curtailed, and so the major groundwater users having to rely on San Juan Chama water as well. Some of them can't. Rio Rancho doesn't have San Juan Chama water, so that would be a really problematic situation. That to me is the worst case scenario. And I don't think we'd order that because it doesn't provide, there's a lot of gaps in terms of just practically providing water that I think people need for public safety and welfare. But conceivably, we could have a federal injunction requiring that and just saying, figure it out, or make a deal with Texas or something. But that to me is the worst option. The biggest nuclear option that New Mexico would impose is sort of just different in kind. We would cut back the use of native Rio Grande water to the extent necessary to meet whatever we need to meet for the compact. And that could be significant cuts to all surface water users, again, except the prior and paramount pueblos, including pre-1907 users and including groundwater users. So those options are on the table, and we have people who are thinking every day about how exactly we have to do that if it comes to it. But as I said before, those result in, certainly a litigation, but uncompensated losses for folks who've invested in whatever they're wanting to use the water for. So it just wallops our economic outlook for the state. And we're trying everything else we can before we get there. We think of those types of priority calls as a necessary backstop, but not the first option.
And that's exactly why these conversations are so important, so that we can get out in front of that to craft solutions that really make a lot more sense to our communities.
Yeah, that's very interesting and terrifying to think about relying on San Juan Chama water when our San Juan Chama water allocations are like 44% last year and who knows how much this year. So let's all work together, as we know we're so good at, to avoid those nuclear options. Let's see. What is the outlook for increasing the funding for OSC and ISC for your outdated management information systems? We know that there's a lot of technology in your offices that need updating, and you've got the data, but do you have the processors to run the data?
I would just say we were really pleased in most ways with the outcome from this legislative session. But one thing that we had asked for and that was in the governor's executive recommendation was funding for replacing the waters database. This is a database that is critical for the work of the agency itself in terms of housing information about water rights, but also a really valuable tool for the public the database is over 25 years old, maybe almost 30 years old. I like to say in IT years, that's like 1,000 years old.
The
And
house
so
interface, by the way, is basically an MS-DOS prompt. That's not what the public sees, but like that's kind of the stuff we're working with there.
it's not a viable system. It's sort of band-aided together, right? This critical data infrastructure at the agency. We've kicked off a process to replace that. I'm so impressed with State Engineer Anderson's leadership, and that she's really encouraging everyone to look at it not as just replacing what we had before, but how do we have the same capability we had before, but much more? Like, what do we need, right? And so we had an ask for $1.5 million this legislative session that we did not receive. We will be coming back to ask for additional funding for that effort. I think we have a path forward in order to keep that project going over the next year. But that's one of a number of examples.
We're taking the money from other stuff that we could be spending on other things to move that forward.
It will require us not funding other initiatives to keep that moving. And that's just sort of one example of developing the technical tools that I mentioned earlier that I think are going to be so critical in supporting the state's work, but also water users being able to access data and understand their water resources. So there's lots to do there. I should say, actually, we did receive 2.5 million of the 5 million that we had requested to support Water Security Planning Act implementation, the governor's 50-year water action plan, and also online modernization of online information and engagement tools. So that will help us. We're really looking hard at our website. You know, how do people access information? How do we make that more accessible to them? Not only water data, but just information on our various initiatives. So we did receive that funding. We'll be moving that forward, but there's significant need to really ensure that we have the best possible tools to support the work of the state and support regional water planning process and all of the stakeholders across the state.
Thank you. While we're on the money front, can somebody also asked about the aquifer mapping project? Can you tell us about the funding for that?
So that funding goes to New Mexico Tech and the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources. They did not receive their full request, but I believe they received 11.5 million to further that effort. We see that effort as absolutely critical for New Mexico, as I mentioned at the beginning of my comments. As we see surface flows decline, communities are going to be relying more and more on groundwater. We have aquifers for which there's a lot of information available and much is known. And then we have other aquifers where we just do not have enough data. And so, you know, Stacy Timmons, who's the vice chair of our commission, Interstate Stream Commission, also leads Water Data Act Initiative and this aquifer mapping program at New Mexico Tech, likes to talk about driving a car without a gas gauge, right? Like, who wants to not know what you're relying on for your community in terms of water if you don't have sufficient data? So we were really pleased to see them get that 11.5 million. Further investments are going to be needed. You know, we're talking with them about establishing a statewide monitoring network with data that can be readily available, and then keeping that maintained over time. So it's not just about drilling those wells, but then having the capability and funding to maintain them and collect data from them.
We're getting a message. They might have gotten the full 22 in the end of the day. So I'm checking. We don't want to misstate, but yeah. But
that would be amazing if
there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a question, there's a comment, you know, how do you help get the funding? I think the aquifer mapping, that luckily there was a broad constellation of groups and people who advocated in support of it. Nobody really shows up to advocate for like IT systems, and those are I mean, we can do a better job of stating our priorities for folks like the advocates who've been great, exactly that, advocates, to make sure that the money is there so that our water policy is furthered. I mean, we don't always agree on exactly how we're doing things, but we really are grateful that the advocates are pushing to make sure that the tools are there so that the job can be done. And I think that we again, we welcome the conversation and pushing us to to be best we can be. We also welcome pushing to make sure that the tools are there.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, I think one thing that we can all do right now to ensure funding going forward, we really need to do a better job of educating our legislators. I don't think that our legislators really quite get a grasp of what the crisis looks like, that we're past a point of no return in a lot of ways, and we really need the funding to get beyond where we're going and not just maintain, but really push forward and get more funding for making headway against this problem. So, in when we're not in session is a great time to call your legislature and say, hey, could we grab a cup of coffee and I could tell you about all of the things that I've been learning about the water crisis in New Mexico and what you can do in the coming session to support our community. The phrase that the water advocates likes to use the best is without water, there's nothing. There's nothing. So really reach out to your legislatures and try to get a cup of coffee with them, sit down with them as a human being and explain where you're seeing the issues where they could make a difference in the coming session with their funding.
Thank you. And just to wrap up on, I just checked House Bill 2 final version. New Mexico Tech, basically, there's creative line item vetoing in the final budget, and there's a bunch of other things that New Mexico Tech was supposed to be getting money for, and all of those things got crossed out, and so all the funding for those other things got piled into aquifer mapping, and so they're getting the full 22 million. But it's nice for aquifer mapping, but it's unfortunate that again we're just taking money from other things that could have been useful and putting it into these critical initiatives.
Thank you so much. We are getting to the end of our program here. There was one last question that I think is a good one to end on. Will there be regular information about all the water shortage sharings with opportunities to balance that justly in order to support the community making those decisions? So as shortages are coming forward, will there be updates to the communities to help our, ABCWA or MRGCD to really help them do what's right for everyone and not just their own interest?
Thank you. We are really, we don't have sort of shortage sharing agreements or sort of arrangements with water users that are kind of public things that I think again were probably things that folks are hoping to hear about. We've had productive conversations with water users. This year is just might be the kind of year where there's just like not a lot of water and we're turtling our way through it. But we really want to have a good public process for making sure that people are aware of what's happening. I don't know exactly how that's going to look for all the shortage sharing agreements, but we very much hear you loud and clear that regular public information on that is critical.
And I would just add, I think, even in the car on the way back from TRC yesterday, Deputy State Engineer Tanya Trujillo and I were brainstorming on how to have data related to drought in particular more readily available as part of sort of the improvements to our website. So I think that's something we want to have our site be a place where you could go on to get real-time information about what the conditions are throughout the state and in your area. So that's something that we're actively thinking about working on and building. We're also very much thinking about drought and how to inform people about what's coming. Everything starts with an understanding of the hydrologic problem that we're trying to solve. Certainly that will be a component of the regional water planning process as we convene those regions, helping that planning process be informed by the best available science data and models and a real understanding of the hydrologic situation that those regions need to plan around. And then also providing examples of how shortage sharing could work. I think the state will have a role in sharing experiences of what we've seen across the state. And then last, I'd also say with some of the money we received last legislative session, we're working on a drought toolkit to provide to communities that could help them evaluate drought conditions, implement water restrictions and decisions, and then communicate those to the public. So there's a number of things that we're moving, and we welcome future opportunities to share with you all about those. And also just want to really thank the legislators who are on tonight. Some of them are championing these issues and really have been so supportive of us in the last couple of years. So thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. We really, really appreciate your time tonight and the very valuable information. As a reminder to everyone, we will be sending out the recording for this as well as the slides. So don't feel like if you miss something, you won't be able to go back, because you certainly will. Everyone who registered will get a link for the recording, and that will come out probably Monday or Tuesday of next week. So please take the time to review any information that you might have missed. I know we had a lot of questions and there was a lot of really great information presented here. And you know what would be really amazing is if you could share your recording with somebody who didn't come tonight. Give people the information and the chance to hear what you got to hear and be more educated about what's going on. So we have just a couple closing things for do your part. But we want you to contact your water agency personnel and let them know about what you're feeling about things, and ask them to help stop the overuse of water and enforce water where it needs to be enforced. I'm posting links for MRGCV and OSC down below. Thank you all, OSC and ISC, for everything that you are doing to enforce water. We know how hard you work. We know it's a huge job, and it's like pushing a boulder up against a hill over and over and over. We do really appreciate the effort that you're putting in, and we know that with community support and legislative funding, you can make a much bigger difference and help us get out of this crisis. We've got a great groundwater presentation. If you all were here with us in February, we had presenters Greta Fellingstad and Maurice Hall with us, and they've got another iteration of their groundwater presentation coming up. This is the flyer for it. It's going to be March 23rd. That's Monday at 5 p.m. And I'm going to post the registration link in the chat for you here. Take the time to go see that. Their first presentation was really amazing amount of information, and every one of their presentations is slightly different. So if you attended the last one, don't feel like this one is one you should skip. It is different information each time. We have a fabulous April series scheduled for you. We're going to be having Laura Pascas join us for a conversation. If you don't know who Laura, she is a phenomenal journalist. She's been working really hard on Rio Grande issues. She has a great Substack. If you are a Substack person, go find her on Substack and subscribe. We're really excited to have Laura with us in April, and I'm going to post the registration link for that in the chat. You'll also get that in our April newsletter. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by the number of links I'm posting and you're not grabbing them all, this will come out in our April newsletter. So you'll have plenty of chance to register then. I want to thank our co-sponsors. Thank you so much to New Mexico Water Dialogue, Amigos Bravos, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, and the League of Women Voters of New Mexico. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for always getting out the word about our third Thursday speaker series. We really appreciate everything you do to support the water advocates. And if you as individuals would like to support the water advocates, we are always looking for volunteers. We're looking for a secretary and treasurer if you're interested in joining our board and would like to take on one of those positions. If you don't want to take on those positions, but you are interested in joining our board, we're always looking for new board members. So please reach out to us. You can find all of our information to contact us on our website. And if you're interested in donating to us, we would never say no. We're an all volunteer organization, and every dollar helps us fund great programs like the one tonight and putting out our wonderful newsletters, as well as all the other advocacy work that we do throughout the year. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for a fabulous evening. And Hannah and Nat, a huge thank you to each of you. Your hard work for New Mexico does not go unnoticed.